people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. Recapping last night's action on Showtime. We saw Gary Antoine Russell, unbeaten up-and-comer Gary Antoine Russell, the younger brother of former WBC featherweight champion Gary Russell, take on experienced veteran Rances Barthelemy in what was an entertaining fight while it lasted.
Yeah, it was competitive.
Gary Antoine Russell, the southpaw, Rances Barthelemy, the orthodox fighter, the seasoned veteran, the former champion.
Some years ago, he used to reign as IBF champion at lightweight.
Some years later, Rances Barthelemy has since moved up in weight to super lightweight, the aging fighter, the aging former champion. And he has been fighting. He has seen action. He saw action 2 times last year. This was his first fight of this year against unbeaten up-and-comer Gary Antoine Russell.
Sports professional record of 16 wins, no losses, and no draws, 16 knockouts.
16 out of 16 of Gary's fights ended by way of knockout. Gary Antoine Russell, who fought only once in the year of 2020 when the pandemic hit, when the pandemic first started. He fought only once in 2020, only once in 2021, only once last year, but he had fought at least once ahead of this fight this year.
This fight with Rances Barthelemy was his second fight of this year.
This was an interesting showing, competitive in spots. You saw vulnerability from both sides. I saw Rances Barthelemy hurt Gary Russell Jr. at least once, and the same can be said in reverse. Gary looks strong, fast, explosive, good dimensions for a super lightweight.
He's so far so good.
Standing in at approximately 5'10", he's got the kind of physical dimensions to where somewhere down the line, some years, you may see him move up to the welterweight division, and he may fit right in.
So he was in action last night, 140 pounds against Rances Barthelemy in a fight that lasted only 6 rounds.
Gotta tell you, that stoppage, it looked premature to me. Referee Shada Murdoch must have had somewhere else he wanted to be as he ended this contest rather abruptly after a big knockdown in the 6th off a huge right hand, a huge right hook that floored the former champion, floored Rances Barthelemy, who
he got knocked down, but he didn't have spaghetti legs.
Got dropped, and he got dropped hard, but he seemed to have his wits about him, seemed to have his faculties. His legs weren't jelly, and the referee waved it off anyway. You kind of get the sense that
he should have given Rances Barthelemy the benefit of the doubt because the fight was competitive throughout.
Not saying that it's a fight that Rances was winning. From where I was sitting leading up to that knockdown, it was Gary Antoine Russell that was in the driver's seat, but because Rances Barthelemy didn't seem hurt, didn't seem woozy, didn't seem staggered, he had his wits about him, you get the sense that the ref should have let the fight go on.
Visible protests from the former champion. He wasn't none too pleased.
Can't say as I blame him. With that, Gary Antoine Russell racks up his 16th professional victory.
And what was his second fight of this year. He's on the right side of the street for some potential title fights in the future.
It just so happens that Josh Taylor's newly vacated WBA title is set to arrive on PBC Island on the undercard of Adrian Bronier versus Omar Figueroa.
The newly vacated WBA title at 140 pounds will be contested between Alberto Puello and Batirzan Akhmadov
next month on the 20th.
While I'm not overly enthusiastic about Gary Antoine Russell's boxing, I could very much see him end up fighting for that title sometime down the line.
He's a ways out right now, coming in at number 11 in the WBA's last set of updated rank standings. He's not knocking on the door of a title shot, but in a few fights he might be. Gary Antoine Russell, an interesting player, an unbeaten up-and-comer in the super lightweight division, having taken on former champions Victor Postol, former champion in Rances Barthelemy yesterday. He seems a solid fighter, solid.
I'm not over the moon when it comes to this guy, but he does have the potential to become a champion.
And even though yesterday's stoppage in many ways seemed like a premature stoppage, I think that Gary Antoine Russell would have went on to win the fight if Rances Barthelemy would have been allowed to go on. on.
That's saying that I think Gary Antoine Russell would have went on to win the fight anyway. Premature stoppage or no premature stoppage. But the premature stoppage does leave a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
Hate when that happens. Gary Antoine Russell currently ranks in at number 11 by way of the WBA, number 11 by way of the IBF. Very soon on PBC Island, both Jeremiah Ponce of Argentina and Subriel Matias of Puerto Rico, they're going to be fighting for an IBF interim slot in order to become the mandatory challenger to the full champion.
Gary Antoine Russell could end up facing the winner of that fight somewhere down the line.
In spite of the politics of boxing and the political boundary lines that determine which fights happen and which fights don't happen, there are still one or two very interesting situations out there for Gary Antoine Russell, who's still making his bones as a professional. Solid showing yesterday, albeit a premature stoppage. He looks capable enough, and maybe somewhere down the line, he'll end up fighting for an alphabet title.
Congratulations to him for advancing to a professional record of 16 wins, no losses, no draws, with 16 knockouts.
We then come to that card's chief support, the heavyweight contest between Adam Kownacki and Ali Demirezen. Adam Kownacki, who was attempting to rebound off of two consecutive losses to the Nordic Nightmare, Robert Helenius. It seems to me that those two losses, those two beatings, I should say, those two knockouts, they changed Adam Kownacki and left him irreparably damaged.
Yeah.
As his punch resistance is all but gone, I want you guys to understand something. Whoever is handling the career of Adam Kownacki has been making decisions that are not necessarily in that fighter's best interests. We often talk about the offer he turned down, the multi-million-dollar offer he turned down to be a stand-in
A replacement opponent for Jarrell Miller after Jarrell tested positive for all those banned substances.
The Anthony Joshua people offered Adam Kownacki a multi-million-dollar payday to stand in Jarrell Miller's place. And I have no doubts that Anthony Joshua, he would have smoked this guy. He would have knocked him out.
He would have knocked out Adam, but at least Adam would have got a multi-million-dollar price, a multi-million-dollar payday.
Hindsight being 2020, if every decision that Adam Kownacki and his team and his handlers made led him here, then he made all the wrong decisions. That's the look of it. They abruptly took him out of the running for an Anthony Joshua fight and put him on a path where he ended up getting beat 2 times for far less money that he could have made losing once to Anthony Joshua in Madison Square Garden. And it's a pity, it's a shame, even worse, is that earlier this year, Adam Kownacki was in the running for a Derek Chisora fight over there in the United Kingdom, and reportedly, Adam was offered a 7-figure price. A 7-figure payday.
Matchroom actually gave this guy 2 opportunities to make life-altering money in victory or defeat.
He would have made life-altering money fighting Anthony Joshua in victory or defeat. He would have made life-altering money fighting Derek Chisora earlier this year, at least more life-altering than whatever he just made losing to this guy last night at the Barclays Center.
You're not going to convince me that they paid Adam Kownacki 7 figures to fight Ali Demirezen.
A lot of content creators here on YouTube have become quite comfortable spouting all sorts of nonsense and misinformation as if Adam Kownacki has been making all the right decisions, staying on the PBC side of things when there was clearly more money out there for him on another side of the street with another promotional outfit. And it's a sad display, to say the least, to see him lose to this guy, Ali Demirezen.
You have content creators out there acting like they're paid employees for Al Heyman, paid employees for the PBC, defending every decision they make.
Even when it so clearly has an adverse effect on the fighter, even when those decisions are not necessarily made in the fighter's best interests. Earlier this year, there were reports that Adam Kownacki was made a 7-figure offer to take on Derek Chisora in the United Kingdom. And that would have been a main event. He would have been headlining the show with Derek as opposed to being the chief support the way he was last night, the co-main event to the main event. And you're not going to convince me that fighting Ali Demirezen as the co-main event at the Barclays Center pays you more than headlining with Derek. Derek is more of a draw.
Derek Chisora has a following. Losses in the double digits and all. Derek Chisora still puts asses in the seats.
For what it's worth, had he fought Derek Chisora, based on what I saw last night against Ali Demirezen, Adam Kownacki likely would have been stopped, and likely would have been stopped by way of a big overhand right, one of Derek Chisoria's signature money punches, but he still would have made more money losing to Derek than what he just made losing to Ali Demirezen.
It's unfortunate. It's a sad display.
Let's talk about what we saw. As stated, Adam Kownacki's punch resistance seems all but gone. His head was snapped back several times by Ali Demirezen, who connected with several eye-catching right hands, straight right hands.
That badly damaged left eye from the Robert Helenius fights was badly damaged in last night's fight with Ali Demirezen.
Adam Kownacki was there for the punches. He was there for the shots. He wasn't keeping that head off center. He was there for the return fire from Ali Demirezen. His offense, Adam Kownacki's offense, seemed flat and dull. No snap on the punches, no snap on the shots. Really looked more like arm punches that didn't put a dent.
You couldn't put a dent in that guy.
Couldn't put a dent in Ali Demirezen, who sports a professional record of 17 wins, 1 loss with no draws. Having never been stopped, his one lone defeat came at the hands of the Nigerian nightmare, Efe Ajagba, who beat him on points, beat him on the cards. He's coming off a win over Kevin Johnson, a win over Gerald Washington before that, and I don't know. Maybe this guy ends up being Deontay Wilder's rebound fight.
If he ever does come back, if he ever does rebound.
Or maybe they stick Ali Demirezen in there with Frankie Sanchez. I don't see anybody in any hurry to fight him. Now, as far as Adam Kownacki, I don't know where he goes from here. He has some soul searching to do. He suffered his 3rd consecutive defeat, his 3rd consecutive loss, and he doesn't look the part.
His punch resistance is waning, his offense is flat and dull.
Really ain't much on his punches. Don't forget, this guy had to go balls to the wall with a very faded Chris Arreola just to win a decision. In last night's fight against Ali Demirezen, he couldn't put a dent in that guy either. You get the sense that Adam doesn't have the punch resistance, and he doesn't have the power to make a splash as a heavyweight, doesn't have the punch resistance or the power to even rebound off the 2 losses he suffered to Robert Helenius, and it's not safe.
The sport's dangerous enough as it is for guys that have a high ceiling. Adam don't.
Adam Kownacki don't got a high ceiling, several squandered opportunities. This don't look like a guy who's ever going to win an alphabet title of any kind.
You can't beat the Robert Heleniuses and Ali Demirezens of the world. You're sure as hell not going to beat those guys in the upper echelon of this division.
Adam Kownacki, sad to say, is cannon fodder, and he's got some soul searching to do because I don't know where he goes from here. Suffering his 3rd consecutive loss back-to-back, he's in a bad way.
This is one of the more mismanaged careers I've ever seen in recent memory.
Yet another cautionary tale about another fighter whose career was mismanaged, and as a result, ended up fumbling the bag. It is what it is. And finally, we come to the main event of that same card, the junior middleweight contest between former champion at welterweight Danny Garcia and former world title challenger Jose Benavidez. On paper, this looked like a much better fight than it ended up being. It was for lack of trying on Jose Benavidez's part. Jose Benavidez, who's a very physically imposing fighter to the eye as far as welterweights and even some junior middleweights go.
But it's only to the eye. He's not actually physically imposing when he's in action.
Noticeable height differential between Jose and Danny, that Jose was the much bigger fighter. It was reported that Jose Benavidez, the day of the fight, weighed in at approximately 171 to 172 pounds. It was clear to see that Jose had a noticeable size advantage over Danny, but he didn't use it. He spent most of the time blocking shots and posturing.
That's what I mean when I say it was for lack of trying. Danny Garcia was able to do what he did to Jose because Jose wasn't doing anything about it.
I don't often have very many nice things to say about Danny Garcia, but I have to admit, having seen the fight, he is the noticeably better boxer than Jose Benavidez is, though that doesn't necessarily mean he's cut out to campaign as a junior middleweight, not facing a less than ambitious welterweight who moved up to junior middle the same way Danny moved up to junior middle. You don't beat Jose Benavidez.
I mean, beating Jose ain't the same thing as beating a Tim Tszyu or a Sebastian Fundora.
Those are more ambitious unbeaten up-and-comers, whereas Jose Benavidez's performance yesterday was anything but ambitious. The judges had the fight closer than I did. I could only give Jose Benavidez 2, maybe 3 rounds out of the 12.
I wasn't doing anything.
Really wasn't. And the judges' scorecards left me scratching my head as to how they could have seen this fight as being as close as they had it when, from where I was sitting, Jose Benavidez shot it. He didn't do anything.
He wasn't doing anything.
Danny Garcia, characteristically, is a fighter who's always one step behind the other guy at the elite level, the upper echelon level, the Keith Thurman level, the Sean Porter level, the Errol Spence Jr. level. These are the fighters that have defeated Danny Garcia on paper in the past. Mauricio Herrera, unofficially, some people might tell you that Lamont Peterson also beat Danny Garcia. Better still, at the highest levels.
At least based on what we've seen in the past, Danny Garcia lacked initiative. He would always let the other guy lead.
He always seemed just behind the other guy, but that was at the elite level, the championship level, and that was at welterweight, more or less. Here at junior middleweight, he was facing a less than ambitious fighter that was quite satisfied with himself, quite satisfied just catching shots on the arms and gloves and posturing. I will say that Danny didn't hurt Jose Benavidez with any of those shots, even the ones that got through. Jose Benavidez did look the more durable fighter. In spots, he even looked like the more heavy-handed fighter whenever he did decide to let his hands go.
You got the sense that if Jose Benavidez puts the squeeze on Danny and applies more pressure, he might actually hurt him.
Seems to me that Jose Benavidez more or less allowed himself to be outworked by Danny Garcia, who was the busier puncher in this fight, even though he's not the busiest of punchers overall, at least not at the upper echelon level, the championship level, not based on what we've seen in the past. In the past, Danny tends to fall just short of the mark of the man opposite the ring, provided the man opposite the ring is on the level. Jose Benavidez isn't.
What I saw yesterday, it's not normal for Danny Garcia to outfight a guy.
And outmaneuver him. There are certain characteristics that Danny Garcia is often associated with, that he's got a good chin. Decent power, at least decent power at 140 and 147 pounds, but this fight was fought at junior middleweight. This fight was fought at 154 pounds. Danny Garcia is not a fighter that's often characterized as being fleet of foot, but he looked fleet of foot next to a more immobile fighter.
He was at least more fleet of foot than Jose Benavidez, who quite infamously was shot in the leg.
Some would say that that has affected his mobility as a fighter in the subsequent years that followed. It's not that Danny is a fleet of foot guy, it's that he's a more fleet of foot guy than Jose Benavidez. It's all relative, and it's not that Danny Garcia is a characteristically busy puncher, he was just busier than Jose Benavidez.
It's all relative.
This was intended to be Danny Garcia's maiden voyage into the junior middleweight division to kick off what's supposed to be a junior middleweight campaign, but who knows if Danny Garcia will fight at least one more time before this year is out. How serious a campaign could it be if you only fight once this year and you didn't fight at all last year?
Time is the one thing you don't get back, and Danny Garcia's in his mid-30s.
Former WBC junior middleweight champion Tony Harrison was in attendance for the fight, keeping a close eye on the winner. Could the PBC be working on a Tony Harrison versus Danny Garcia fight?
Tony Harrison has the right style to give Danny Garcia fits.
Tony Harrison, who would have a comparable size advantage to the advantage that Jose Benavidez had over Danny Garcia, with the difference being Tony's base style. Tony is an economic stick and move outside jabber. He's a pure boxer, a moving target with a lot of height and a lot of reach on a little guy like Danny Garcia.
That's a fight we may end up seeing down the line, though, as far as this fight.
The fight between Danny Garcia and Jose Benavidez, put simply, it's not that Danny's cut out the campaign as a junior middle, it's that Jose Benavidez, he didn't fucking do anything.
He gave the fight away.